This is Research Like a Pro, episode 305, Southwestern Research with Michelle Mikkelson, part 3, Land, Mining, and Agricultural Records. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Research Like a Pro today.
Hi, Nicole. How are you?
Doing great. How are you? What have you been reading?
Well, I have been reading a book that was recommended by Josh Taylor in our Understanding Colonial America and the Immigration into Colonial America. And he suggested this book, which of course caught my attention. It's called Myths and Realities, Societies of the Colonial South by Carl Bridenbaugh. So Bridenbaugh. It's just kind of an old book. It was written in 1963 or published in 1963, but it's based on colonial sources, which I think is so fascinating. He has pulled from papers and letters and writings from the 1700s from people living in the South, and he's divided it into 3 sections. So first he has the Chesapeake Society, which is Maryland and Virginia. And then he's got the Carolina Society, which is primarily South Carolina because it's much different than North Carolina. So Charleston mainly. And then the back settlements, which I haven't started yet, but I'm assuming that's going to be, all the areas that are further west. And he just talks about the primary focus, land, farming, culture, education, just kind of a look into the societies. So it's made me think a lot about our ancestors and where they were and what they were doing and how they fit into the society at the time.
Wow, so fun. I think that we often forget about that in the thick of our research, and then it comes to writing and we're like, what was the time actually like? So what a wonderful resource to be able to use in your next report or whatever you're writing that incorporates that area.
Yeah, it really will be a great resource. And I don't know that we had any ancestors that were in South Carolina during colonial times. They moved there a little bit past that. But it's going to be really fun to look at my research with new eyes with some of these insights from the book.
For sure. And there could be some lines we just haven't figured out yet that were there. I mean, the Welch and the Keaton family, we don't really know for sure where they came from.
Yeah, and when they got there. So it's always good to build our knowledge up a little bit and realize we just don't know everything. I think we all realize that.
Our announcements today are that we have our Airtable Quick Reference PDF downloads available. We have 2 of them. We have Airtable Research Logs for Genealogy, which is in its 2nd edition. And then we also have Tracking DNA Matches with Airtable. And both of these are quick reference guides, 4-page PDFs that you can either print and laminate on large paper, or you can just print them on regular paper and not laminate, or whatever you want to do with them. But you can view them digitally or whatever. Our next webinar in the Research Like a Pro webinar series is coming up on June 18th. We have Jessica Taylor Morgan, accredited genealogist, presenting the Oliver case using deductive reasoning with British parish records. And that will focus on a couple, William Oliver and Mary Heap, who were married in October of 1782 in Derbyshire, England. And their children were born and baptized in the nearby Rolleston parish. How do we find William's and Mary's baptisms without a birth year? What do we do when multiple people have the same name and none of them died young? This lecture focuses on using critical thinking and English traditions to solve a research quandary riddled with roadblocks. And she will dive into some of these lesser known record types like parish chest records and also using parish maps. So that should be a wonderful lecture, especially if you are wanting to do any England research. So we hope that if you haven't registered yet for our 2024 webinar series, that you will go ahead and sign up. And we always have fun with that every month. Jessica is one of the researchers on our team at Family Locket Genealogists. Well, if you want to join our next Research Like a Pro study group, that begins at the end of August, and registration opens very soon, May 21st at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. To be a peer group leader, just fill out the application on our website or email us if you've been a peer group leader in the past. And we're excited about our Research Like a Pro with AI 4-day workshop, July 29th through August 1st. And each day we will talk about a couple steps in Research Like a Pro and how we can use artificial intelligence tools like large language models to help us and become more efficient in our process to research like a pro. If you haven't joined our newsletter yet, we encourage you to do so. It comes out every Monday and it has links to all of our new videos, podcast episodes, and blog posts, and any upcoming talks and conferences we'll be at. So we'd love for you to join us in the newsletter. This week is the National Genealogical Society Conference, which is being held virtually this year on May 17th and 18th. So we will see you there at our virtual booth and for our talks. And so we look forward to seeing you virtually.
Thanks, Nicole, for running through those. We are excited today to have Michelle Mikkelson back. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Diana. Hello, Nicole. Thanks for having me today.
Of course, we are going to be wrapping up our Southwest United States Research series and talking today all about land and property records and mining records. So we're going a little bit different way, and I'm really excited about this. So where are we starting, Michelle?
Let's start with the Homestead Act. That was the act that significantly spurred Western expansion into the United States. It's what brought everybody west to get land, to seek for gold. And it allowed people to buy up large plots of land, to cultivate it, to farm, to build a home, to raise cattle. Lots of opportunity was there. These records are amazing. They can be found at the National Archives, Bureau of Land Management, the General Land Office, the GLOW records, we might know them as, and in most state archives. These documents typically contain information like land location, description of improvements, what buildings they built, animals, crops, trees, lots of different things that make the context of your ancestors' lives really interesting. And one of the things that you want to make sure and do is to get the entire land entry case file. That can be obtained through the National Archives. And you want to request all of the documents, just not one or two certificates or files, but all of them. I thought a fun thing was to go on NARA's website, and they actually have a sample of the Charles Ingalls homestead from Little House on the Prairie. And so you can see the different documents that they had to sign, the process that they went through. It doesn't really provide names, but it does give you insight into their family structure, what they did, how many children, or, just kind of the household in general. And it's fun to see the improvements that they made. So homestead records are a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are really great. I know I ordered some in New Mexico for my Royston ancestors, and one of the daughters had filed for her own homestead. And when I read it, I realized that they were living in a dugout while they were trying to build a house. And then they eventually just let go of that claim and went back to Oklahoma because I don't think New Mexico was exactly what they thought it would be like. So it was so fun to read all the little details, though.
Well, living in a desert, I can very much relate to not having it be exactly what you thought it would be like to be very hot and dry all year.
Maybe the dugout was nice and cool, and that's why they lived in that.
Probably. That is just fun to have that sample of Charles Ingalls on the NARA website so you can get an idea of what's in there. Can you tell us a little bit more about what might be in a land grant document?
Yeah, so these documents are filled with a lot of legal terminology, and they can be a little complex, but they're valuable in that they contain names of the landowners, the dates that they purchased the land, the descriptions. And what this information can do is help you locate your ancestors and kind of figure out their economic status. Many have been digitized and are accessible online through Family Search and Ancestry. And one of the most helpful websites I found is the Utah State Archives Land Records page. Goes through and deciphers all this terminology. It tells you what it means. definitions, how they're related. It's a real handy guide when you get to your land research. I had a second great grandfather that I found online, and it was so fun. You'll hear terminology, or read rather terminology, like Southeast Quarter or sections or townships or ranges. And this identification, or these coordinates, can help you really pinpoint where they lived. And then on Google Maps, you can see the geography and kind of the topography, and rivers and mountains or dry desert too. It just makes it fun to really pinpoint their location.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, and I would just make a note that these are all federal land states, or maybe they aren't all federal land states. Maybe you'll talk about that, but I believe they are. So they, after they became states and the land was distributed, they are in using that grid system as opposed to meets and bounds. But before each of these states became a state, they belonged to often to Spain or to Mexico. And so then we have a whole different type of land that we're going to want to work on. So tell us about those records.
Exactly. And so that's what makes this region so fun, is it was inhabited before the Europeans came west. And the fun thing about Spanish and Mexican land is that it was given in huge chunks. So one of the lore, one of the stories in our family was that we had a Spanish soldier in our family, and he came and helped settle the California area. And he was given like 4,000 or 6,000 acres, like a lot of land, a big chunk of land. And that was given by Spain, which then was transferred to the Mexican government. And so as the land was divided, and as the United States came and purchased the land, they honored those land grants. And so there's a lot of historical information, a lot of court cases. These landowners had to provide documentation about where the land came from, who their families are. And so they're really rich in that aspect of genealogy. One of the fun things about this too is it gives you an idea of what the land was like before America came and took control. People were growing gardens, and they had cattle, and they had communities already in place. And so part of what you'll find in those records are maps, legal documents, grant applications, and these can be found in the state archives. Some are in historical societies, some are in university collections. One of my favorite is the diseños. They're the maps where these Spanish families, in order to provide the documentation that the American government required, is they had to get a sketch of these documents, and they're really fascinating.
Well, that's so interesting. I think that anytime you've got a little bit of a quandary about who owns the land, you're going to have a lot of records. And so that is what we're seeing with these grants when they had to prove ownership. Our family's had this land for 100 years or whatever. You're going to get some really interesting records. So fun to understand that we've got Spanish and Mexican land grants available if our ancestors were there before statehood.
Yes, I used it in my accreditation to rule out a same name candidate for my second great grandmother. There are a lot of Antonios, and by finding the certificate of registration from the San Francisco Land Office, I was able to determine that this location of land and the same name candidate that was on there was not the guy we thought he was. His wife was named there as a widow. So that was helpful to know that relationship. And then the location of the land also was key in ruling this person out as an ancestor.
Right. So much information that can help you separate men of the same name. So that's a great example.
Well, we've been talking about finding all of these land records and land grants. How can we then map them? Do you have any tips?
Oh, these are so fun, Nicole. So modern tools like geographic information systems, or GIS, historical maps, online plat tools allow genealogists to visually trace where their ancestors lived, and how the land changed over time. Tools like the USGS historical Topographic Map Explorer and the Bureau of Land Management's Land Patent Search are particularly useful for overlaying old maps onto modern ones so that you can visualize exactly where they lived and what it looks like now. My favorite one is, and the easiest one that I found to use, is located right on the BLM land patent search page. So once you have brought up your patent image, just click on the details tab and check the box above the upper right hand corner. There will be a map at the bottom of the page, and there's just a little box up there. Click it, and it will just magically zoom in and graph that exactly where they lived. And that's really easy and really useful, and it really gives you a good sense of location and time. And there are links for that in the blog post and the show notes.
Well, those land mapping tools are wonderful, and it can be so helpful to overlay the maps, like you said, to be able to visualize modern locations and ancestral locations. And often those boundaries have changed, especially in these Western states where things were just changing so quickly as populations grew. So, what a good tip to do the overlaying of the maps.
Oh, I completely agree. We always want to try to find that location that our ancestors were living. Well, let's do a word from our sponsor, newspapers.com. This episode is brought to you by newspapers.com. Discover your mom in the paper when you search newspapers.com. Find the stories that made her who she is today by searching the largest online newspaper archive. Newspapers.com makes it easy to find your mom, grandma, and others in the papers. Search more than 945 million pages from major news titles to small town papers. Uncover birth and marriage announcements, obituaries, photos, and much, much more. Explore papers dating back to 1690 or as recent as last month. Newspapers.com is used by millions of people every month for genealogy, historical research, and more. Find something you like? With newspapers.com, it's a snap to save and share articles with family and friends or attach them directly to your ancestry tree. Use promo code FamilyLocket for a 20% discount on your subscription. That's code FamilyLocket, and celebrate the stories of a lifetime with newspapers.com.
Well, our next topic in the Southwest is to talk about this unique subject of mining. So tell us about that, Michelle.
So, mining is another major historical element of the Southwest and its culture and development, especially during the gold and silver rushes. Records for mining include claim registers, miner registrations, MINER, and they are available at local county recorders' offices. They provide valuable data like names, where ancestors were from, a personal description of the miners. And these are also digitized and found at state archives and genealogical databases. They include details like claim locations and personal information that can lead to clues to other records, including census and immigration. Links to collections, both general and by state, are in the show note. In census records, if you look at the occupation column, you can see if your ancestor was a miner. This is a time that was not heavily covered with government records. So a lot of newspapers covered mining accidents and named their family, who was involved, the company owner. So newspaper articles are a good way to find out more information about that. Another interesting piece is maps of mines per state. For example, New Mexico has all of the mines located throughout the state, and it's fun to kind of track the railroads and see, how a railroad led to all of that, because that was a major part of the building up of the West is the railroad. That's what brought families here. So that makes us able to track their movement and kind of see where they ended up. It's been really interesting. I noticed that after the Civil War, there were soldiers who would come and work in the mines, maybe not only to earn money, but to escape from those experiences that they had just survived. I'm starting to see a pattern of that. So soldiers from Ohio or Indiana, maybe it was just the adventure of going out west and exploring, but it's a real interesting trend that I've seen more recently in research. They're really fun to find. It's definitely an interesting time in our history, and the interesting characters that came. It's not a real stable environment for families. Trying to blend in with both was a little tricky.
Yeah, you can just imagine that Western town with a bunch of men and like one woman, and just not a lot of
Yes.
families. Well, that was a really great overview, and it'll definitely be helpful to look into those registries. I hadn't heard of those before, so I'm excited because I do have a couple collateral relatives who went to the gold or silver rushes, and so I'd like to look them up in those.
See if we can find those people chasing the gold. Very interesting to think about all the mining that took place in the Southwest. Well, we have talked a lot about land in this episode. Let's just talk for a bit about some records that are not the actual deeds or land records. What else can teach us about what our ancestors were doing on the land?
So agricultural records are a lot of fun. And the way to begin your search there is looking at the non-population census records for farm census data. These agriculture schedules give us clues to what our ancestors farmed and what their life was like. It will provide information like the farm size, the types of crops that they grew, wheat, corn, livestock counts, like how many cattle or how many poultry, or, you just get a really good sense of what they were surrounded by. And then they have to put a value on what they had. And so you can tell if they had a big farm or just a small farm. These records are accessible through the National Archives and, again, historical societies. They each offer a perspective, again, on the economic and social status of farming families. The dairy industry was really big in California. We tend to think of citrus, but dairy was a big one there too. And so it's just interesting to see where the different locations, what they grew and what they produced. There are links to those federal non-population schedules in the notes. And if you don't find your farmer on the census, they probably just had a smaller family farm. A farmer had to produce a certain amount to be counted in the census, whether that was by farm size or value of their goods. So that could be a clue too. But if you do find them on there, their name will be correlated in the population census as well. So that gives a number to the agricultural census.
Well, those agricultural records can be so interesting to look at, and I'm always surprised by how many cattle and head of hogs they have, and just imagining the amount of work that would go into keeping a farm like that, and so it can be very helpful to understanding their lifestyle.
One of the things that I've noticed is sometimes they weren't even farming all of their land. It will say how many acres you're actually cultivating, and they maybe have only cleared or have 2 or 3 acres ready. And then the rest of it is all this maybe desert land or wooded land that they can't use yet. So it helps you understand what they were going through and just trying to get land ready to go. We sometimes think of they had 80 acres and they're farming all of it, but no way. That was going to take way too much work right at the first to get it all ready.
Well, and this was before John Deere came into the picture. I mean, these are
Exactly.
hand plows. And if they improved, an acre per year or, several acres, plus they had to build their home first. It's a real interesting thing to contemplate and to really picture them in that plain environment.
Well, I think it also speaks to why they wanted to hand this land down to their children. They'd worked so hard to get it ready, and now here's this land that's all ready to go, and you can just farm it now. It's easier. And, I think that's all the way through this era.
And how many of the children actually helped cultivate that land? They've invested in it and they want to continue that on. So it was definitely a family thing.
Well, speaking of cultivating the land, in the Southwest, we have some deserts, which is where I live. So tell us about irrigation and water rights. And are there records associated with those water rights?
There are, and it's just amazing to think that in this desert, we can grow crops. And irrigation was a big part of being able to water our crops. I live in the southwestern part of Utah, so we're desert too. And it is just dry. There's not a lot of rainfall, but there are canals everywhere. And so, yes, when our ancestors purchased land, they had rights to the water. And these are really helpful for understanding how the land was used, the agricultural practices of that time. And these can be found in state water resource departments. So each state has a local water district, and these records are there. There's some interesting things. They can shed light on family relationships and their interactions with the community. Sometimes there were family disputes. Sometimes there were disagreements over how the water was used. And so these will be, in essence, almost like a court case. You go in and they're writing documentation and describing their land and its use and why they need it or why it's going somewhere else. And so these can also be helpful too.
It sounds like it, and that's a really good way to think of it, that it's like a court case.
Yeah.
I think there probably were a fair amount of disagreements among the neighbors and water rights
Mm-hmm.
because water was so important. So that's really fun to think about that as another source for records to understand our families. Well, we've talked a lot about different kinds of records like these agricultural, water, mining records. Maybe you can give us a hint of how to actually find those, access those, and interpret those because they're something a little different than we're used to.
They are. You want to have a good understanding of the historical and the economic context to accurately interpret the information on these documents. So you want to focus on specific locations and time periods that are relevant to where your ancestor lived, and pay attention to employment roles and land ownership that can lead to broader discoveries and more research. So, in addition to the sites already mentioned, one of the most helpful starting points is Cindy's list. Her category search is a really great place to use terms such as mining or agriculture, and that will lead you to specific collections for those things because they are a little bit different than your typical census and birth, marriage, death. And so Cindy has a really great way to break that down and give you options of where to go. But know the area, and that will get you off to a good start. You also want to remember to, as you're researching the records, to cross-reference the information and compare them to multiple sources. This will give you a more accurate and complete picture of your ancestors. So you'll take the water papers, you'll take the maps, you'll take the census, the agriculture, what grew there, what didn't. And that will really give you a good idea if you combine those sources together.
I love that idea. And that is what our research reports bring together, isn't it? That's where we get to assimilate everything that we've learned, put it into context, explain what it means for our family. And such a good basis if we do something like that. If we've done a project and then we put it into a report, then we've got that ready to go when we want to write a family history. If that's our end goal with all of our research, to write something up about this family, but to have like a little report about mining and agricultural records, all these types of things. So, such a good thing to do.
It adds to the narrative of our ancestors and makes them come alive and realize, what their day-to-day was like. We're working in narratives at ProGen right now, and that's part of that is that history, what was going on in the world and what was going on in the community. And so pulling all of these pieces together really makes it fun to explore our ancestors' lives.
I agree. And you've given us a lot of food for thought about different types of things to explore.
Well, what can you talk about for our case study section today?
I decided to try something different because if anyone's like me, I didn't know a whole lot about water records and mining claims. I mean, who uses those? And so I got a little help from AI and used that just to kind of give an idea of what would you search for? How would that look? So I learned best through repetition. And so for every state in the Southwest region, I've included an example of an outline or a case study outline that focuses on mining and agricultural records. So it shows you how to use each one, what kinds of objectives, the main focus, what to look for in the types of records that you're going to use in your research. So each example illustrates a different aspect of these areas. For example, Colorado has a coal miner, and that objective is to explore his life during the industrial boom. And so you'll use employment records from coal mining companies, you'll use union membership records and strike deals, census records, and immigration forms. And the focus will be to learn about the working conditions and the community life in the mining towns and the role of immigration. People would come from other countries and they were familiar with that. And so they would do that. And then it also gives an idea of what to expect. So social and cultural dynamics within that community, a lot of saloons. It wasn't called the Wild West for nothing, but gives you an interesting viewpoint there. Also, New Mexico chili farmers, to trace the history of those families involved. And this is where the agricultural census comes in, and market reports and family ledgers and business records or oral histories, and then focus on techniques and market trends and the significance of chili farming in a family community and how those families adapted to the market demands and the influences of culture. So these are all just kind of ideas about how you would use these specific records. And there's also a bonus in there about the boomtown families. So to understand the effects of mining booms on family structures and social life, say in Nevada, then you go out into local church and school records and mining company records and census. Again, we'll give you a good clue into that, but just kind of how the demographics shifted and what the social fabric was like. It was a very transient community. And so there was a lot of instability with families. You just kind of came and went. And so it just gives you an idea of possibilities. And so I hope you'll go on Blog Post 6 and kind of get some ideas about what you might find for your ancestors who mined or farmed in your state.
Love that. It would be fun to research more about the chili farmers in New Mexico. And of course, my family definitely had a lot of Utah farms. And I think anyone who had somebody who went to California during the gold rush probably has a story or two about that. We have a ancestor on my dad's side who he was part of the Mormon battalion, and then he did some gold mining while he was there in California before he came back to Utah. So we have some fun stories about that, and it would be interesting to dive into that a little bit. So thanks for these great ideas and some different outlines for how to go about it. And this has been a really good discussion of incorporating that historical context into our research.
On my husband's side of the family, his grandfather was a school teacher. And during the summers, he would go and mine in Park City. So it was a way to make money. And a lot of people tried it out. So,
Well, it wasn't as long term as a farm. You
yes,
could just go work for a few months. You go work for a year, get your money together, and then go do something else. So I think it is an interesting thing to think about, maybe more of our ancestors' mind than we know about.
it would be.
Well, Michelle, this has been so fun. Do you want to tell us about the special offer you have for our listeners?
Yes, I'm so excited about being on the podcast and sharing all the Southwestern information. I wanted all of the listeners with Southwestern ancestors to have access to a resource I designed during accreditation to help guide their research in this region. It's a one-page, at a glance focus on birth and death records across Arizona, California, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah. So in this area, there was already a standard in place to record marriages, and that was at county formation. But there was not a standard for births and deaths, and they're all over the place when they became available. So this guide will provide you with the starting dates for official records in each state. It gives the general compliance years so that you understand when those records became available and standardized. There are suggestions for substitute records when official documents were unavailable, and information on restricted access periods to help you navigate those privacy laws. 5 out of our 6 states in the region have restrictions on these records, 50 years, 100 years, 75 years. Knowing what records are available and where to find them can make all the difference in our Southwestern research. So with this guide, you'll be able to look at what the time frame is, what the time period is, what's available, and these principles can be applied to those researching outside of the Southwest region. So feel free to download this guide, use it as a template for your own locality guide, and have fun researching. And to download your free copy of this resource, visit the website mygenealogy.com. It's spelled M-I, genealogy.com, and sign up with your email. And this will help you unlock the stories of your ancestors' past, one record at a time.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for being with us and for writing the blog posts, sharing your expertise in researching in the Southwest, and then for being on the podcast. So we wish you the best with all of your research, and we're so grateful that you have been able to teach us so many fun things, give us new ideas. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everyone. We will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.